format for tonight's debate will be as follows. First, we will have David Wood, who is representing the Christian viewpoint here. A round of applause for David. And then also Heina, Dadabhoy, who is representing the atheist viewpoint. So for the benefit of the audience as well as our timer, the format will be as follows, Mr. Timer. Opening statements will be 15 minutes each. Are we ready, audience? Yeah. Well, let's learn a little bit about our first panelist. Dr. David Wood is a member of the Society of Christian Philosophers, the Evangelical Philosophical Society, and the Hume Society. A former atheist, David became a Christian after examining the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He is a contributor to books, Evidence for God, 50 Arguments for Faith from the Bible, History, Philosophy, and Science. Also, Defending the Resurrection and True Reason. In addition, Christian Responses to the Challenge of Atheism. And David has been in more than 40 moderated public debates. And he also runs the website acts17.net. David lives in the Bronx with his wife. Her name is Marie, and he has 4 sons, Lucian, Blaze, Reed, and Pele. All right. And I asked each one of the panelists for a fun fact. A fun fact about Dr. David Wood. He grew up in West Virginia in a trailer park. Please welcome Dr. David Wood. And then also, I'll go ahead and read, since we just have the 2 panelists tonight, let's learn a little bit about Heina Dadabhoy. Now, she spent her childhood as a practicing Muslim who never in her right mind would have believed that she would grow up as an atheist, feminist, secular humanist. Heina has been an active participant in atheist organizations and events all around Orange County, California since 2007. Now, on the national stage, she's been involved since 2011. She is currently writing a Skeptic's Guide to Islam, and she also blogs on Heinous Dealings of Free Thought Blogs Network. I also asked Heina about a fun fact about herself, and she smiled and said, Della, I will be attending my first prom this weekend in Missouri. A round of applause for her. So without further ado, let's go ahead and open up. I will invite to the podium Dr. David Wood for his 15-minute opening statement. Are we ready? Yeah. Are we ready? Yeah. Dr. David Wood, you're up.
Well, good evening. I'd like to thank Christian Century Toastmasters Club and Backyard Skeptics and Huntington Beach Community Church for arranging this debate. The French writer Joseph Joubert said that it's better to debate a question without settling it than to settle a question without debating it. I hope we can settle the question of God's existence tonight, but at the very least we'll debate it. I'd also like to thank Heina for representing the atheist position. Some of my best friends over the years have been Muslims, and the psychological pressure to conform and comply is beyond what many of us can comprehend. So I'm always impressed when someone has the courage not only to leave Islam, but also to do so openly. So, does God exist? Yes. And I'm afraid there's no way around this, my friends. Of course, on a superficial level, we can kind of look around and say, well, I don't see God, so God doesn't exist. But on a deeper level, everything you see around you depends for its existence on God. Werner Heisenberg, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery of quantum mechanics, said that the first drink from the cup of natural science makes one an atheist, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. And it's something I've loved for a long time. If you're convinced that you understand the world without God, keep drinking. Not alcohol, of course, but keep drinking to the bottom of the cup, and we'll see where it goes. Now, to show where this goes, think about what's necessary, what's required for something simple, something we're doing right now. Think about what's required for us to be having a debate right now. I think we'd all agree that we're having a debate, so what's required for this sort of thing? Well, the first thing we need is a universe to debate in. But the interesting thing about the existence of our universe is that it requires an omnipotent, personal, timeless, immaterial creator. For thousands of years, theists maintained that God created the heavens and the earth. For most of that time, what atheists there were maintained that the universe is eternal. And these seem to be the only two possibilities. Either the universe has been here forever, or you come to a limit if you go back in time. Much to the horror of atheists, 20th century research showed that the universe is expanding, and therefore that we can trace it back to a beginning. Now, since the universe began to exist, we're left with two further possibilities. Either the universe began to exist as a result of some cause, or it sprang into existence uncaused. Now, the second alternative is obviously absurd. Out of nothing, nothing comes. But this means that the universe has a cause. This cause can't be bound by time or composed of matter, because time and matter came into existence with our universe. So the cause of our universe has to be timeless and immaterial. It also has to be personal. There are only two kinds of causes we appeal to, natural and personal. Natural causes are the kind we appeal to in scientific explanations. Personal causes are the kind we appeal to when we said that someone chose to do something. Now, the beginning of the universe can't have a scientific explanation. Scientific explanations presuppose laws of nature, and nature wasn't there to bring itself into existence. But this leaves us with a personal cause. And since a personal cause who can create a universe ex nihilo, out of nothing, would be powerful enough to do anything that could be done, the cause of our universe is omnipotent. So we know that an omnipotent, personal, timeless, immaterial creator exists, and we know this based on the simple fact that our universe began to exist. But could we have a debate like this in any old universe? No. In order for Heina and I to be debating right now, the fundamental structure of the universe has to be finely tuned for intelligent life. The forces, principles, and constants of physics, certain physical quantities, the ratios between the masses of atomic particles and the properties of elements and compounds have to be just right, or we wouldn't be here. Consider some of the simple forces of nature. Without gravity, there'd be no planets, stars, or galaxies, and I wouldn't even be able to stand here at this podium. Without the strong nuclear force, protons and neutrons wouldn't hold together in the nucleus of an atom, and hydrogen would be the only element on the periodic table. Without the electromagnetic force, there'd be no chemical interactions between atoms, and the molecules necessary for life could not form. Think about the principles of physics that are essential for life. The Pauli exclusion principle keeps electrons from all falling into the lowest orbital. Without it, there'd be no complex chemistry, and we need complex chemistry for life. The principle of quantization keeps electrons from falling into the nucleus. Without it, there'd be no chemistry at all. But the fact that we have the necessary forces and principles isn't nearly as surprising as the fine-tuning of the numbers that physicists plug into the laws of nature. These are the constants of physics: the cosmological constant, the gravitational constant, the strong force constant, the fine structure constant. These numbers could have had a wide range of values, and yet the values they actually have fall into the extremely narrow range that makes biological life possible. As the late astrophysicist Sir Fred Hoyle said, a common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. So we need a universe, and we need the fundamental structure of the universe to be finely tuned for life. But just as you can have a beautiful doghouse without actually having a dog, you can have a universe finely tuned for life without actually having life. So the third requirement for us to be having a debate like this is complex biology. So where did Earth's diverse biological complexity come from? The most obvious explanation is some kind of design, and human beings are actually quite good at recognizing signs of intelligence. I mean, if we look around this room right now and ask ourselves, did that camera have a designer? I don't know what person designed it, but I could tell by looking at that it was designed. Same thing with these lights, this microphone, this podium. I don't know who built the podium, but I know someone built it. And based on what many atheists tell me, what are the only things we see around us that didn't require a designer or a creator? Us, human beings. And we just happen to be the most complicated things in the entire universe. Now, if your response is, well, the universe is a big place, and so lots of weird things can happen, I don't think you understand the probabilities involved, and I'd be happy to go over those a little bit later. But until then, I'll just say that if this podium and this laptop require a designer, all the more these hands and these eyes would require a designer. Of course, we need more than just biological complexity to do what we're doing. Cats are biologically complex. They don't debate the existence of God. In order to ponder our place in the universe and to ask difficult questions like this and to desire answers and to find these answers satisfying or unsatisfying, we need human consciousness. And it's important to recognize that human consciousness isn't merely having a large and convoluted brain. Consciousness requires what we would call a soul. My atheist friends insist that awareness, thoughts, emotions, hopes, decisions, and so on are simply physical states in the brain. But what sense does that make? My beliefs are true or false. It doesn't make a lot of sense to say that this pattern of molecules is true and this other pattern of molecules is false. I have thoughts that are about things. It doesn't make sense to say that this pattern of molecules is about something. If a scientist examines my brain, he might learn all kinds of things about my brain that I don't know, but he'll never learn more about my mind than I know. If a scientist wants to know what's in my brain, he can give me a CAT scan. If he wants to know what's in my mind, he needs to start asking me some questions. So even though the mind and the brain are clearly closely linked in human beings, they can't be identical. They can't be the exact same thing. If the physical world were the end of the story, human consciousness would not exist because the human mind is inexplicable in purely physical terms. Theism, however, is the belief in a God who is immaterial, invisible, rational, creative, and self-aware. Since the human mind is immaterial, invisible, rational, creative, and self-aware, human consciousness fits quite nicely into a theistic framework where God creates not only a world of physical bodies, but also a world of immaterial souls. When it comes to debate, however, we're not interested merely in human consciousness, but with a particular activity of the human mind, the mind's ability to reason. Heina and I are only willing to debate a topic like this because we trust our reasoning ability. We wouldn't waste our time debating if we thought that our cognitive faculties, the processes that produce our beliefs, were unreliable. But atheists have a problem here, because they generally claim that our ability to reason is the product of natural selection acting on random mutation. Natural selection, of course, favors traits that help organisms survive and reproduce. So if human reasoning evolved naturally, it's because it helped humans to survive and reproduce. Would this give us a basis for trusting our reasoning ability when it comes to questions of theology or philosophy? No, at best, our cognitive faculties would be reliable when it comes to finding berries or using a spear against an enemy or doing something to attract a mate. Interestingly, Darwin himself noticed this problem. Towards the end of his life, he said, "With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind?" Compare this with theism. If theism is true, our cognitive faculties aren't simply the product of natural selection acting on random mutation, and they serve a greater purpose than finding food. So our ability to reason about the existence of God makes perfect sense on my worldview, but it doesn't make a lot of sense on atheism. This means that if atheists want us to take their arguments seriously, they'll need to give us an explanation consistent with atheism, which accounts for the reliability of human reason. Until they do, I'll have to regard their claims as incoherent and self-refuting. Finally, as we debate the existence of God, our reasoning is governed by certain logical truths, the law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, various valid argument forms, and so on. When Heina and I present arguments, we're presupposing that there are logical absolutes, rules of reasoning that cannot be violated. If I say God exists and Heina says God doesn't exist, we can't both be right. Because if you say we're both right, you'd be saying that God both exists and doesn't exist, and this would violate the law of non-contradiction. A statement can't be both true and false at the same time in the same sense. But what are logical laws? They're not material objects. You don't learn about them through the senses. You can't see them, hear them, touch them, taste them, or smell them. You'll never find them with a telescope or a microscope. You learn about laws of nature you learn about laws of nature by making observations and forming generalizations. That's not how you learn about laws of logic. Logical laws are abstract and conceptual. They're concepts. Concepts exist in the mind. The law of non-contradiction was true before there were any human beings. So the law can't just exist in the mind of humans. If all human beings died tomorrow, it would still be true. In fact, the laws of logic would be true in any universe, not just ours. So the laws of logic transcend time, space, matter, and all human minds. They're invariant, unchanging, and eternal. But if logical laws transcend our world, and if logical laws only exist in a mind, there must be a mind that transcends our world. We call this mind God. Putting all of this together, we see that in order for Heina and I to be having this debate, we need a universe to debate in, finely tuned laws of nature, complex biology, human consciousness, reliable cognitive faculties, and access to logical laws. The existence of our world requires a powerful, personal, timeless, immaterial creator. Fine-tuning and biological complexity require an intelligent designer. Human consciousness shows that there's a world of immaterial, invisible, rational, creative, and self-aware beings that supports theism and falsifies naturalism. The reliability of our cognitive faculty shows that they have a higher origin than naturalism can provide, and theism gives us this higher origin. Since logical laws transcend our world and only exist in a mind, there has to be a mind that transcends our world. What does all of this mean? It means that even in debating the existence of God, God has to exist. Since debating the existence of God requires the existence of God, and we're debating the existence of God, I'd say God must exist.
All right, well, I, like David, would like to thank everyone for being here and for everyone for setting this whole thing up. I will say that we are anomalous among theists and atheists doing debates like this because, as one of my Christian friends says, see, I can have friends from other beliefs too. He says that every atheist, given the percentage we are of the population, must have at least 3 websites to account for the amount of atheism online. But David and I are the exception to that. I only have one, David has 3. Now, I will not tell you that there isn't any way around my argument because I am far more comfortable with uncertainty, I think, than David is. But I will present my evidence, and I won't say what I think that theists or Christians think because I may be wrong. I haven't sat down and examined every single one of your sets of beliefs. But, I will present what I think. The world didn't come about via chance or blind force, and life did not come about by random mutation. There are natural processes that can account for all of these. There is no problem with thinking that there is no God behind it all. If the idea that there can be this mind that controls everything or some creator force behind the universe, why does it have to be a deity? Why do people come to the conclusion that it must be a deity? And we can actually find that explanation in science. If we look at psychology, if we look at sociobiology, if we look at sociology, human beings tend to find patterns where there may or may not be patterns. One example is pareidolia, where we see faces where there may be no faces. So if you look at Mars, everyone sees a face there, or the moon, you see a face there. And religion, in a lot of ways, is just a social version of pareidolia. It's a way of finding patterns out there in the world and saying, there must be something behind it. There must be something reasonable and rational and similar to human thought processes behind it. Although science shows us that's simply not true. Science is not about settling questions, but about asking them and finding out even more of them. It's the uncertainty principle. It's being okay with the fact that we're just human beings. We're just tiny specks of dust in this giant universe. And there are a lot of things we don't comprehend. I'm fairly comfortable with the fact that I don't comprehend exactly how my smartphone was built. Even though I am in web development, I am in technology. Probably all of us rely on experts for certain things like understanding of geology or astrophysics or biology or even technology, plate tectonics. We rely on experts for these things. Because we do that, we don't automatically assume that these things are magical or mysterious or somehow supernatural or personal. We know that, there are reasonable explanations for this. Just recently, a probe was launched on a comet. How many of us here could do that? How many of us here could be that guy in that tacky shirt? Let's be honest here. Who else could be that guy saying, hey, I did this thing? Probably none of us here could, even those of us who are in the sciences, who are in technology. To go back to the idea that human beings sort of find patterns where there may not be any, for thousands of years, theists have not agreed that there was a God. They have disagreed with each other and waged war on each other over which God is correct. So to look at history and say, oh, well, all of them believed in God and there's just a few atheists clamoring to be heard is sort of fallacious given the brutal and violent history and, let's just say it, current reality of theism. There may have been atheists in the past that I don't necessarily agree with, who were wrong about the idea that it was an infinite universe, but theists have proven themselves wrong over and over and over again about far more scientific matters than a couple of atheists in the past clamoring about an infinite universe. But again, I won't say what every theist here believes. I won't presume to speak for you. What we see here is a God of the gaps. So it begins with people not understanding the natural processes that drive the world, that have brought the world into existence as we know it, that have caused all the natural phenomena we see around us, from the weather to human reproduction and everything in between. And slowly but surely, the march of science has proven theism wrong over and over and over again about every single issue, and God has suddenly shrunk into smaller and smaller places. Suddenly, God only explains the final cause of the universe, where before God was said to account for every act of human reproduction, was said to account for every cloud and every leaf falling from a tree. Now we have reasons for that. We understand why that happens. So slowly we're just retreating God into this particular role. And call me an optimist, but I feel like that role is just going to keep getting smaller. So what do we do? What do we do about that? We accept uncertainty. We accept the fact that we don't have to know everything. And just because we don't know everything doesn't necessarily mean that ancient explanations account for it. Now let's talk about the idea of reasonable principles existing, no matter whether or not there are human beings to think of them. To me, that's a tree falls in a forest argument. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Does it matter? If all human beings were wiped out and logic still existed, I'm not sure if that would even be reasonable to talk about, because who would be there to talk about it? And if we're going to talk about a powerful and rational being, let's talk about what this powerful and rational being is responsible for. It is not a finely tuned universe. The universe is hardly finely tuned, and neither is life. The constants are constantly in flux. If you look at the latest in astrophysics, you'll see that there are all kinds of particles that we don't know about, that we can't see, that we barely have any idea about, that literally blink in and out of existence. So I'm not sure what fine-tuning is being talked about here. If we look at biology, we see even more examples of bad design. I say design in quotes because I don't think it is design. It seems that if there is a creator deity, this deity had a pretty severe lack of foresight. If we look at human reproductive peril, and I say peril for a particular reason, human beings walk upright, even though our originating species did not. And that means that the female pelvis is so small that giving birth is a death-defying experience. In addition, most pregnancies don't even come to fruition. Most of them spontaneously abort. So you have a fertilized egg that certain contingents of the United States are very invested in protecting, but allegedly this very well-designed universe causes most of them to be flushed out into oblivion. The majority of them. The pharynx, which is our throat, it's for eating and breathing. You know how many deaths could be prevented if we had a separate tube for eating and for breathing? Instead, children suffer and die. The elderly suffer and die for the simple reason that we have one tube for everything. Breathing is regulated not by the amount of oxygen that's out around us, but the presence of CO2. So you start choking when you sense the presence of CO2 with, sense is the wrong word, but when your body recognizes that there's a presence of CO2, you start asphyxiating. The lack of oxygen does nothing for you. And in fact, that has been suggested as a way to humanely euthanize people or animals. It's by pumping the air full of everything except for CO2 and oxygen. There's a laryngeal nerve in the giraffe. The laryngeal nerve loops all the way down to the bottom or the center of the giraffe and all the way back up, meaning 15 feet of a nerve that could have been attached right here. The most sensitive nerve bundles for pleasure in the human being don't facilitate reproduction. In the human female, they are external, and in the human male, they are internal in a place most people don't want to go. Not knowing doesn't mean that we do know what we think sounds reasonable. I think it is perfectly reasonable for me to say that we are both right on some level. You are right in that you have a particular belief that guides your life and you feel it is real. As long as you don't impose that in my life, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. But I don't have that belief. Consciousness is not a proof of a soul either. Consciousness, or what we call consciousness, can be manipulated, can be gotten rid of, can be stimulated in certain directions. Out-of-body experiences, feelings of going to heaven and meeting one's relatives, that can be induced with certain electrical shocks and chemicals. It's not that difficult. There is no inherent meaning in the chemical symbols in or signals in our brain. There is no inherent meaning in them, but we do interpret them. They are a part of our biology. They are a part of our bodies. Debate is not a product of some perfectly well-designed universe. Debate is a product of the fact that human history has existed for thousands of years and that we have recorded history and that we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And we have the luxuries of living in a well-developed society. Debate didn't happen when we were on a savanna hundreds of thousands of years ago. Debate happens when we have other people to do certain jobs and we're highly specialized. And so I'm able to leave my job, which I do a job that doesn't even produce anything physical, and come here and have a debate. I choose to focus on human accomplishment. I choose to look at human history, and you can find all the explanations there for everything that you need. You don't need to go into some sort of supernatural realm in order to see where human knowledge comes from, where this debate comes from, where consciousness comes from. And frankly, The lack of design that is betrayed by a lot of the problems that exist in human and other animal biologies is enough to question this idea that there is a powerful and a rational deity.